As was mentioned, I'm Dave Schuler, Coordinator for Field Studies, and it's really an honor to introduce our speaker for today. Because we're just a few minutes short, I'm going to make this brief. And I normally wouldn't do that, but I know Dan very well, and he'd probably just as soon I bypass with any kind of formal introductions. But I do want to say that Dan is extremely personable, and some of you know him, and some of you haven't had that privilege yet, but he's an extremely personable person. Very warm, very caring, and pays attention to individuals, and that's one of the things that really has influenced me about him. Dan was, I don't know, clear back in the probably late 90s, went on his field study in Africa, in Ghana, or Nigeria, started out in Nigeria and then to South Africa, worked in our office for a while, and just we were very happy to see him go on. Worked for an NGO in D.C., went back to school at Maxwell up at Syracuse, got a Master's of Public Administration, and has been doing some very interesting things since then, and we look forward to hearing about those from him. And with that, I'll welcome Dan Nelson.
Well, thanks. It's an honor to be here. This is actually the first time I've been on campus since I graduated, so it's unique to go back and see how things have changed and some things stay the same. I'm glad field studies, internships, international work is still alive and kicking, and your interest in the topic. I'm just going to ask a few things on a show of hands to begin with, so I can gauge where you are and maybe change some of my remarks accordingly. How many people have already gone on a field studies or international internship thing through the school? Okay. How many are seniors? Juniors? Sophomores? Freshmen? Okay, perfect. Helps. Again, it is really exciting. I have very fond memories of this building and this campus. And before I get into presentation, I think we should take a time to reflect on this building and this purpose. I think it has one of the higher missions within BYU for buildings on campus. Looking at what then BYU's president, Jeffrey Holland, said about the Kennedy Center, said that none should be more important, speaking about its goals and functions, none should be more important than the commitment not only to study, but also to serve. In the Kennedy Center, I hope we will teach the fundamental importance of service, that we will promote the cause of peace and friendship through very personal effort. As we enlarge our circle of understanding, we will enlarge our circle of concern. We will strive to promote prosperity and dignity and to combat poverty, degradation, wherever it may be found, monumental as that task is. That's a pretty serious mission, and when I was here as a student, that's what attracted me to this building versus other buildings on campus, all doing good work. But I think it's important for us to always think this opportunity that you have to be here in various capacities, whether it's a student or a staff or faculty, what role will you play in helping the Kennedy Center reach those goals? So the presentation for today, I was asked title something like International Field Studies, the Foundation for a Career in Development. Because a lot of people, there's usually a lot of passion, interest in this, but no way or no knowledge, and this is new experience, some new fact in your class, experience as you've gone abroad has tied in, and some people think, maybe I want to take this a step farther, but I have no idea on where to go, what options are. Do I want to consider this, or is this an event in my life that's great? So I've been asked to identify some of the means by which you can start a career in development, continue maybe what you've started today, and with only the knowledge of reflecting on my experience. So this is the title that I chose, but it could have just as easily borrowed some language from Edward Abbey and taken his approach of finding employment as a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, and a half-hearted fanatic of development. And for those of you who've already been abroad, maybe that might resonate with you more. People get caught up in a particular area, a passion, a topic, something that's caught hold of your heart and burns within you. You study, you tie that into classes that it shouldn't even be tied into. You stretch the topics on papers, looking for a way to get this topic to meet this requirement. And the professors are wondering why. And this is your area at this time. And you may switch to a different topic, but you have that feeling. Sometimes it's easy for that to take over and to lose control, or how to guide that energy. But it's definitely here. It was here. I was studying my friends, and so it's keeping that in mind. So I'll walk you through some areas of my life so you can see how my approach was with that experience. Hey, Malcolm. Sorry, it's exciting to see good people. And then you can put in context my advice at the end and maybe frame for some more questions. So when I was at BYU, it was constantly exposure to exciting ideas, and only some of that happened in the classroom. We had so many organizations going on, groups meeting off campus, trying to synthesize new topics, new learning, and how we were going to apply it. And there were always quotes that we were coming up and pasting up on all over walls, and we were looking about the need for a vision, how to embody change, the importance of keeping hope against all odds, and then reflecting on what consecration means and the idea of sacrifice. And where I really got involved first, I was through the business school. I got involved through student clubs, and most particularly was the Students for International Development, SID. Just a quick show of hands. How many people are involved in that? Just curious. All right, thanks. And how many people have been to a hunger banquet? Raise hands. Even more. Great. Those were some of the most memorable experiences of my time here at BYU. I think it's easy to get caught up in a moment, worry about something that's due the next day, but when I look back now, realizing it's been a few years, what I take away, a lot of the learning was from these activities and the close friendships that I have to this day, and the support within this field come from these activities. So I'd strongly recommend for anyone to find out about them and get involved. And from this, it created more of, fueled my passion, my learning. And so I wanted to find an outlet. I was having new questions, but I needed to see what's going on in the real world. So I signed up for the field studies to gain experience. And I went to Nigeria and South Africa, as Dave said, and this was my first, those are the first countries that I visited in developing context. And I was working with microcredit organizations, how they were setting up their board of directors functioning. This was in Lagos in Nigeria, and then in South Africa up in Zanin, which is northeast by Kruger Park. And it was a very important experience. All the studying classes I worked, as soon as I got there, I realized just how ignorant how little I really knew, and how much more I could process, and all those journals that we were keeping, trying to learn from the experience and needing to write it down, because sometimes it took until the experience was over and I was already back in BYU to see what happened in a new setting, in a new light, and find ways to apply it. So it was an inspiring time for me to see how a few dollars could make a difference in someone's life, and to see the people that were committing their lives to working in those types of organizations, to making that possible. But also, for my viewpoint at the time, I also had a hard time with the scalability of some of the organizations I was in. The amount of time spent reinventing a wheel, or how hard it was to keep from getting tunnel vision. You have a small organization, you have small resources, you don't have the opportunity to learn what 5 or 6 other organizations, in nearby townships are doing, and comparing and contrasting, because you're so focused on just keeping your dream alive. That was on the very small scale NGOs. And so I reflected on my time, and at BYU, my questions were more along, your things in class. What's development? What's poverty? What are the roles of individuals, society, government, NGOs? But personally, I was looking at these issues in a new framework, a new light for me, and I was thinking, well, what can I really do? I saw something, I saw a need, I felt something different. Is this just something that's interesting? You write a paper on, you go to a couple of class meetings, you're involved in a hunger banquet. Is it more than that? How will this affect my future? This wasn't a career path to begin with. And constantly, day and night, especially usually at night and usually late, what am I doing? And I still ask that today. So anyway, so that I kind of view this at this stage was where I was when I was in your shoes, whether you're there or not. That's my mental framework of where I was. A lot of energy, good learning experience at BYU, but wondering no direction for where to take it. So then there's the big step, especially maybe thinking for the seniors. There's employment, always something to look forward to in life. And so I got my first job, and at the time I thought, I'm going to look into this area and this interest a little more. So I went for a nonprofit in D.C. That focused on developing the capacity of government officials when they were interacting with the private sector on large infrastructure projects. So there's a big boom going. Public-private partnerships is the generic buzzword, but you can break it down into so many subcategories. When they're looking at, roads or contracting out, what is the role of government? When are you looking for a private sector involvement? And while that's a very conservative mindset, it was interesting. The entire NGO was run by Peace Corps people, except for myself. And we were working on these projects, and I went for this organization. I liked what they were doing. I liked the idea of education and learning versus pushing one agenda, and I wanted some international experience. And I thought, if I go with this NGO, it's a smaller group, I can prove myself, I can get out there, I can get international experience. As many of you might be experiencing, you see these opportunities for jobs, or you wonder on these careers, but it always starts off, you have to have already done it before you can do it the first time, right? That's where everyone's dies, struggling. How do I get that first break? So I went for a small NGO, thinking that that's where I would do it. And I wanted to try to understand some of the issues that I'd addressed of development, of poverty issues on a more macro scale and get that perspective. Some of the NGOs, maybe government is the enemy, maybe it's a supportive framework, it's a funding source, or it's canceling out the program and you're trying to come up with a supplementary system. So I looked at that and wanted to get a larger framework perspective. So I got my break, and I was working. That was a friend of mine. We were working in an office in Cairo, and so I was over there running a project for USAID, and that was for working in the solid waste sector. And Cairo didn't have a system for garbage collection in the neighborhood, so private hotels or rich neighborhoods had it, and they were looking at a system to go on, and their viewpoint was they wanted to quickly just outsource it to an international company, most of those bids coming from European companies. And so we were to try to provide the education framework for the government officials that would be overseeing that process. What would you worry on, from contracts to bidding process to working with the press, the community organizations? How do you get support? How do you design a system that works? These pictures, you can see when trash cans started coming in, this is the idea of what you see instantly from field studies or your first international exposure, your mindset, how a good idea doesn't connect with reality. And you can't ever see that unless you've been there, unless you go out. So you have a trash can, but you don't have a system for, collecting it. And these are non-sexy examples. You have containers on the side here that people put out, but nobody wanted to put trash in. They wanted to use it to store water or grain, keep it out of the rents. Well, the whole plan that was just masterfully built and was about to be pushed through had no concept that maybe these containers served more of a had more value to the individuals in another means. You had dumps that were on fire for 3 years, and they were just upriver from the water intake source for the city. So that was leading to the health problems. And you realize that any problem, no matter where you address it, has so many facets and comes from so many different angles that you always have to take a step back and look and see, are you missing an angle? Have you forgotten to talk to someone? Is there, if you want to call it a stakeholder or something that isn't being represented at the table? But this was my experience. I really enjoyed it. It was a good experience for me. I learned a lot on like managing a project, the idea of success. Somebody's looking at success in how fast something happens, how large it is, dollars associated with it, numbers of people involved. Success can be defined in many different ways, and trying to see other people's perspective. Again, looking at this again, same questions. Can I really make a difference? I'm working on this multi-million-dollar project. I'm running it, but should this project even happen? Do I support it? Is this a hobby, a job, a career? The future. And I easily saw that if I didn't have more education, that I would cap out. Usually for the experience that I was in, most people already had masters or PhDs and about 5 years of work experience. So I'd gotten into a great opportunity, and I could have taken that, but there's always a ceiling or a cap, and I knew there were questions that I still had that I couldn't answer. So I thought, well, I'll go back to school. So I went to the Maxwell School and picked up Master's of Public Administration. It was the degree that I wanted. And the experience, again, I'm going to come back and drill this in, but experience, you've got to get out. You've got to get experience so that you can ask the right questions when you're still in the classes, could push you forward. And it helped in this program. I'm sure it helps on getting into the program. Very few people in this program get any financial support. I could get full ride. I'm sure that helped. Going in, faculty already knew who I was, and they had their individual research interests that they were coming to me and saying, hey, I think this ties into something that you've done. Can we work together on? So it was a very rich learning experience where some people would lose 6 months, 8 months, just understanding the new environment. The Maxwell School has a capstone project where people go for about a month and a half and work on an applied problem. Usually they're working in the city of Syracuse where the university is. Sometimes they go exotic and go to Washington, D.C. And this is for a master's level. Now, I said, well, I'm going to go to India. That's where it ties in for me. Nobody in the history of the school, Maxwell's the oldest school of public administration in the U.S., has ever gone abroad. So after you work through issues with the system and you kind of sneak it through, and I'm still working with groups now, it's become institutionalized, but you think that's at people getting a master's of public administration with a master's of IR, and they're wondering, can they go abroad for a month? So reflect on the experience that you have here at BYU and really take advantage of it. And you have to be willing to go all the way, even if you get weird exotic diseases and you're in 120-degree heat and your eyes swell shut. And it happens, and you email people and say, what do I do now? I can't see. I'm interviewing people, and they're afraid to have me in the room. But life goes on. So then questions. It was a new situation. There were new answers. I was focusing on a lot more on how will this affect my future and family at this point. I'm single at this point in my life. And I was looking at, I had job offers in D.C. that I could go to. There were nonprofits that I had job offers with. And then with the skill set of the management on the projects, there were a lot of consulting firms that were interested. And so those were my job options at that time. So I was very lucky. I'd also been introduced to an amazing woman who was out in Portland, Oregon, who I didn't know that well, but seemed like there was something there. And so this was, again, getting personal for how you make decisions. And I was reflecting on the role of a university. I mean, studying public administration, studying citizenship, a university shouldn't be buildings up on a hill. It should be this incubator for the knowledge and quest for knowledge that students have and how to get involved. And how can you tie the resources and the goodwill and good intentions and energy of people to make a difference in the community, whether that community be very local, a few blocks, larger city, counties, the country, or the world. And I thought, how am I going to balance this? So there's a lot of roads to go on in life, and there's so little time. Eventually, if you don't make a choice, you've made it. You've foregone the opportunity. So at this point, what was right for me is I chose that although the jobs were all in D.C., I chose that I'm going to go to Portland and find out about this woman. And then, which is always a good decision. Then also, I'd been talking with the university, and I thought, this university needs to do something different. It needs to do more. It needs to think bigger. There's ways to get involved. People want to do it. It isn't about payment. It's about tying in desires of people to make a difference and use this time that you have in life fully to study and to learn, to actually study and learn and apply something that you care about. You'll be busy in jobs, and maybe those opportunities will be restricted later on. And so I wrote this passionate plea to the dean and other people in the school. And lucky for me, even though I'd chosen to go to Portland, they decided they'd create a new job and hire me, and then let me work from Portland and fly into Syracuse for meetings. So sometimes, even when, the lesson on that is when it really shouldn't work, sometimes it does. And you've got to just count yourself lucky. And so I started working on some research work that I developed with my studies in India with the Indian bureaucracy, and worked on a project, and most of what I do now focuses around India. In India, the civil service system, the creme de la creme, is called the Indian Administrative Service. And these officers usually have picked up advanced degrees, master's, PhDs, a lot from foreign universities. They'll take a year off to study for an exam that takes between 12 to 16 months. And around 250 to 300,000 people apply for these jobs each year. And by the end of the year, approximately 60 people pass. So pretty tough. Once you get in, you're a demigod. You can do anything. The power that you hold is absolutely amazing. And your beginning jobs would be the equivalent of you're over millions of people, and you can decide whether more funds are going to health or education or roads or what have you, and you constantly move up from there. So within the IAS, they're looking as India is changing drastically right now that this system that's a legacy from the British, is it working? Is this concentration of power in the hands of the few a good idea? Are there issues with corruption that can't be resolved? Is it a non-flexible source of the government? These officers will work within the state as well as going back and forth to the central government. And it would be like being over the University of California system and then going to D.C. and being over the director of the Department of Social Security, then going over and running a port system in another state, or being agriculture in Nebraska, and then switching back and forth. So they don't it's not a specialization. You're smart enough to get in, so then obviously you're smart enough to do whatever the job requires. And so the struggle that the government of India is looking at is how do we input an education component into this senior bureaucracy within the government of India. So there's we run a 2-month program each year in India where they've been on the job for 15 years, and they're switching from large-scale project kind of management. A policy is decided, and they're going to execute it, to this is a time in their career where they're kind of switching over to playing more of a role on the large-scale issue of what area of government will be funded. One person I'm friends with, he's over schools in Kerala in the south, which means he's over 50,000 schools and 200,000 teachers. And if he decides to say we're using, blue ink, or a different history book, and he has no background in education policy. So that's the power. So this is the area of input that we're interacting with. I thought of if you can expose new ideas at this audience, the chance that a concept can be applied is fairly interesting. So this is a big expansion for the Maxwell School to be involved in this program, and we're also responsible for tying in the Indian government on gaining international perspective. So we had planned to take all of them to China. So we were working with the Chinese government, and the level of, I know some people in the room here are familiar with India, the level of ignorance, and not saying it bad, it would be in this room too, of what's going on within India and within China at a more micro level is surprising. But the desire to compare and contrast yourself with a system that's completely different is always there. How fast did X and Y, growth? 9%, we can do 10. No one's even checking if the numbers are right. This need to compare. So this exposure that as barriers go down in this globalized world, that government officials are going to need to not only react to their constituents within their given area of control, but realize that the pressures are increasing from outside, and how can you both take the good and the bad of that situation. Let's skip some things to give more time for questions. So how is my role? This is my project that I'm in. I'm usually, this year, I was in India a total of 3 months, about a month in South Korea and a month in China. And before, I was the backpacker. I was the field study. I'm sitting in the small hut. I'm taking notes. I'm observing something for the first time. Now I arrive in India, and where's my car with my siren? I don't want to wait for traffic, So, I've got a lot of things to do, and time is precious, I can't be bothered by these things. So, things change. Public transportation, I travel by official car. I got to stand for pictures and have official meetings. I'm signing MOUs, trying to tie in academic institutions from different countries, finding ways of collaborating, joint degree programs, contracts for these. My biggest part of my day is how to get smart people to work together, which is incredibly difficult. If a bunch of people don't have an opinion, then someone can say, hey, let's do it this way. Hey, fine, we're done. But everybody's got their cause, their interest. How can you make sure that everyone feels their piece is included in the project? So that's my challenge on getting smart people to work together. But it isn't always serious. It isn't always meetings different from the past. The fun side, the personal side of travel never goes away. I can still catch Diwali in India, even if I've got to really scrub it out of my hair for a meeting with the government the next day. And I can still learn, from the individual connection. And there isn't that separation of as much in the U.S. as this is who I am as a professional and this is who I am as a person. Those walls are much lower. And it's a unique way to solve problems that maybe couldn't be addressed on too personal level or a too professional level. So always working within the different cultural guidelines or constraints. And then this isn't the only thing in life. It's always about finding a balance. For me, I have to escape. I have to go in the wilderness, and that's my way where I pull back from the crazy schedule and say, what is it that I'm doing? What am I trying? What's important to me? So that's my place for reflection and refuge, so that I can go back in and zero down. I didn't realize until afterwards about BYU and the beard, meaning more here. So now, where do and these are all people from SID and the Hunger Banquet, and we meet once a year in Utah and go rappelling. So it still tie in those connections of friends. So now I live in upstate New York in a small town of a total of 5,000 people, about 2,000 residents, 3,000 students, surrounded by dairy farms and a lot of corn. It's my wife. I did get married after the time there, and digging the driveway out for me, or at least for the picture. And then my current window to the world is at home. I don't have a regular schedule. I go in to the university about 3 days a week. I'll work from home too. But again, like I said, this year I was traveling international alone for 5 months and then some trips here in the U.S. So time becomes a very precious commodity, and you rely on different technology devices to keep you bridged. And I remember we moved into this town, and we've just moved there since January. We're still getting to know people. It's hard to get to know people when you're not there. And it comes down to a weekend, and maybe we haven't met people in the community yet. We're still getting plugged in. But then, next day, like next week, I'm going to be in Delhi. Like, well, shoot, there's 3 dinner appointments for the same night. How do you juggle this and make everyone happy? And it's so funny how we can stay connected, how easy it is, and keep those personal bonds going. And it's also interesting how easy it is for us not to keep those ties. Right now, I'm still going in my career path, but there's a few things that I wish I had known when I was still at BYU. But I have no connection with the school. Neither does the school have a connection with me. And it's easy for these close networks of friends, the people that are on your left and your right, for distance to separate you. Not intentional, but life gets busy. And how do you keep that together? So I want to focus my points on advice I would give to you with this context now for how I approach life, for its strengths and its weaknesses, and how this can hopefully help you as you decide which way you're going forward. First, you need to know in development, career tracks do not exist. In many professional fields, if you're going into nursing, you're going into law, you're hitting in something, you get a certain level of certified expert, and this is your job, and you start working for that organization, and you're there for 5 years, and then you might shift laterally or move. That does not exist in development at all. There's very little hierarchy. There are some, as a colleague of mine says, badges of honor. Do you have international experience? Yes or no? You're in or you're out on that decision. Talking with a friend yesterday, holding a senior position in USAID, and she says, I'm reviewing people to hire, and somebody's got, master's level, area specialization, this, and still they'll say, this other person's missing that, but they've got experience. And it's amazing what a trump card that is. Now, if you have the education input and that background and the experience, then now you're really talking. But you've got to have experience, which goes into number 2. It's essential. You need to get out there, because otherwise you can work all the way through your academic studies and you'll never realize that you forgot to ask a question, because in your mind it was within one context, but in life, as it moves forward, it's in another. So highly recommend it, especially in the undergraduate level. Trying to get out there, look for opportunities that line up. It's the internships, it's the field studies, whatever you can do, but you've got to get abroad. It's to the point that we even tell some people graduating from the master's program, forget a job, volunteer for a year, get that under your belt. You've got to get out there. Now, if you're in an organization, a university like BYU that's supportive, and you walk out of it without it, it's going to be hard to make that up. Plus, life continues to get busy, and your ability to take 6 months and leave, even if it's part of your job experience. Before, somebody would tell me that you have a free ticket. I don't care where it is. I'm gone. Now, how can I cut this trip to Delhi short by 2 days? Because otherwise I can't go to Korea. It's a different mindset that I'm still getting used to. Not necessarily a good one and not necessarily one you'll be in, but your time to get the experience really will start now, and it will help you in as you go for further education with your degrees. A lot of people are going to school for $30,000, $40,000 a year undergrad. They're going you're in a unique situation financially speaking. So if you can find some other support here on campus, definitely go for it. Flexibility is the key. I didn't know where I was going to be right now. I don't know where I will be. I try to figure it out, and I try to prepare, learn, study so that I can be more responsive to the environment, so that I can recognize an opportunity. If I see there's something to change and it's something that I feel passionate about and it's important, that I have the required skills. But the idea that you can plan out, as some people do, I'm going to take this for pre-meds, then I'm going here, then I'm going here, and then it all works out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's, valid way of moving through life. In development, if that's how you approach life, you'll probably get very frustrated. And so just be conscious of that. Cultivate friendships. The key people that I stay in touch with are still, the core is from the university days, when we might be pursuing completely different research paths, but we had a bond of a common experience. And how much that has helped to get reflection when I'm struggling with an issue and I'm worried that maybe I'm approaching a problem and I don't have this perspective, that I can call on a friend and say, hey, what are the issues? How would you approach this? So your friendships while you're here, join networks, associations, the professional ones. This is talking with your professors that you're working with, working in the field. You've got to get your name out. You've got to be involved and find out what's happening at large. Trustworthy. This is, I think, development work is sort of an incestuous business. People know people, and that's how you find out about a job sometimes before it's released, or if there's thousands of applications come in, how can you rise to the top? If for whatever reason you violate, you're dishonest, you're just shut down, and there's very little room for error in this area. So you can never compromise your integrity. Probably not a key issue for this audience, but one I like to bring up. It has to be there. Be persistent. This is not going to be easy. If you're really committed to doing work and work hard at something that you think is worth doing, recognize that. This is going to be a hard road to go down to. And you're going to have commitment in yourself to get through different tough times professionally. And you might be making compromises in areas that other people place value or put limit your restrictions. That maybe it's financially. Maybe you're taking a pay cut to do something that's important to you. Maybe you're doing something else that's a quality of life. Think through that. But if what you're doing, if you think that it can make a difference, then in the end it will be worth it. And then last, kind of going back to my second title for the presentation, don't burn yourself out. It's very easy to get excited about a cause and tie into it. Keep it in perspective. There's so many aspects of life that's going on, and life, the balance will always change. I'm married now. Traveling before is great. Now I travel and I'm like, how do I keep this? My wife can go. That's really great, which she does sometimes. But if it's not, then that's separation. We don't have kids yet. Hope to. That's going to be an influence. Do we set ourselves up for travel that's longer, where we could go and have a very long-term experience, or that are the individual trips shortened down? Think about that in the type of your work. What kind of work are you doing? Are you really interested in crunching the numbers, or you're interested in doing research on a problem? For you, do you have to be talking to the person that's affected? Do you need to be out there in the field working on it? Is that too small, hard for you to focus on? Do you need to take a step back and look at large policy issues? See what area attracts you. There's plenty of needs in all of them for good people working in this field. So those would be my tips. I know some people have to take off different times for classes, so I put my email down. So if something hits you later on, feel free to send me a message. But I'd like to just end there and just take questions if there are any.
How do you deal with the various languages?
It's a good question, and actually that's one I should put on the tips. Anything you can do to learn a second language will broaden your horizons and open up new experiences for you, even if that language doesn't help you in the situation. Just, oh, you have a foreign language. They don't speak it here, that's fine. It still pushes you through. I don't. I struggle with English. And luckily, the British, went around the world, and I'm able to work in a lot of places. And where I'm trying to work, get involved internationally, but where my role is, I know I'm happy if I have a base back here, so it works. And tying in with a university is what works for me.
Because I'm an MPS student here at BYU, and my question is, how do you get the public sector, how do you get the private sector involved in supporting the public sector initiatives so that the public sector can deliver services that satisfy the needs of the citizens without having the private sector think that they have to get something in return? How do you bridge these two sectors?
That is a very excellent question. And it's one I can delve into, but I don't have a quick soapbox, succinct answer. I can say part of it, different countries are facing different regulatory environments. How do you control aligning incentives? When is that profit sharing going on, depending on the project? It's one thing if you're talking about something that's distanced, like a toll road, people on or off. It's another thing if you're talking about water, something where everyone has their right. It's a very, very complex issue and has to be there's principles and guidelines that we could spend a couple of hours on, but even then, every situation has to be approached as a unique example, because too many times I've seen Cairo, for instance, that was solid waste that was involving private sector. They were using a contract that they were borrowed from another country, and it's in the contract you go through and it says you have to clean the beaches every 10 days. But there was no beach. This was down south. So it just, here's a contract somebody has, let's cut and copy, cut and paste. Realizing that every issue has to be thought out, and there might be, from a legal standpoint, maybe the environment's the same, but culturally it could be different, and you need to change all the structure accordingly. You have a good idea, but you don't have buy-in from citizens. We do it here in the U.S. Down in Florida, they recycled, in Tampa had a system for recycling all the water that comes in, purifying it, and putting it back into the water system. But they had the perfect engineering. It's completely sound. And then they hadn't talked about to the public. There was an article in the paper that said from toilet to tap. And people threw up their arms and said, I'm not drinking that water. And even though scientifically you could say this is pure, it actually increases the standards, they scrapped the whole system. And, so it just, everywhere it's constantly thinking through, and it's hard to align those incentives. Now some orange growers get all that water for free because they can't use it for citizens. But maybe I can catch you some more later, just in case there's a few people before class starts. But thank you.
Well, my question would be in regards to this career path. That's actually why I came. And for you personally, I don't really want to get tangled up in an organization that I don't completely agree with, in the, say World Bank policies or the IMF or something like that, and get on even their senior board and have my hands tied behind my back because of different regulations and policies that they have. And so, I didn't catch your first part of the lecture, but how could you make a difference on like an international and particularly governmental, the government sector of a lot of these third world countries, which I think is a huge problem. Transparency of loan money, where does it go, et cetera. How can you get on something like that and affect that without throwing in, and saying, okay, I'll work with one of these big international USAID or, one of those organizations?
Let me answer that in two. If someone has got a class, feel free, and I'll try to stay after for questions. But it's hard. It is really hard because when you're looking for that experience and you're trying to find employment, your knowledge of what's out there is sometimes limited to the big players, and it's scratching the surface. Maybe for one organization you feel like you agree with its principles, but once you are in, you see something that you don't like. It's hard because also if you go completely small grassroots, you say, forget these large-scale institutions, I'm at least going to make a difference with this one subject and so you minimize your reach, and you potentially become in a small organization that isn't sustainable, and it relies on funding from some other larger organization, which then dictates your mission of your small organization has to drift according to where the funding is. But there's powerful, for you it sounds like maybe nonprofits, these large networks, and you think of if you like the Gates Foundation, for instance, then they're completely rewriting how countries approach their healthcare policy. Maybe you like them, maybe you don't, but they're not a government. And there's large-scale foundations and organizations that if there's one that you feel that you can support in, there's definitely room to get involved. And if you don't want the hands-on approach, still getting into ones that take more of a think tank approach and reflect, or maybe you want to be a vocal critic of one of the other ones to help reform. You can be a reformer from the outside or a reformer from the inside, and that comes down to personal choice.
And then the follow-up question on that is, it sounded like, you somehow have gotten into a large scale, you're talking to people that are over millions of children and their education. Is that a public-private, or
This is completely working with the government of India, and the legal background of it, it's a sole source contract with Syracuse University and the Maxwell School. So where I went for nonprofits, I wanted to get more of that reach, but I wanted to, after volunteering, I wanted to get in a nonprofit that dealt with more policy issues. I then saw how easy it is for the organizations to shift. I didn't want to get into government. I didn't think that was right for me, or for multilateral or bilateral. The idea of getting in through a university and expanding the role and involvement of a university to be service, that fit perfect. It didn't exist at Maxwell. So I wrote this, and they liked it, and we're trying it out. But this gets into creating your own place.